All right, my AP literature friends. So I have something pretty wild up my sleeve for this particular video. And it's like I'm cooking. I have a few burners going all at the same time here. So first, I'm going to show you how to construct one of our favorite essays. So FRQ 2, 2022, Linda Hogan's People of the Whale. So we're going to revisit our octopus friend for this. And I'll demonstrate how my students cobbled together the essay using my templates of the declarative and the inverted thesis with regards to their introductory paragraphs. And then as far as the bodies go, my kids rocked out with the syllogistic method. So, and I know many of you are familiar with my templates, so I'm not going to belabor that. The big thing is I want to show an alternative to traditional grading methods that incorporates the very hungry caterpillar. And for whatever reason, I find that when I dig into my coffers of children's literature, students engage better and they seem to learn more. And I know that, early in the academic year, I start in September. I'm in New York State, so we start after Labor Day. Getting, the goal to get my kids to write the way I need them to write come May, come time of the exam, I need to do a lot of elementary things in my instruction to get them to be that caliber of writer. But the big thing with this too is I really dislike traditional grading methods for a number of reasons. One, I don't believe in compulsory unpaid overtime as an English teacher. I think that I like to work my contractual hours and I don't like taking work home. And I found early in my career that I was doing 60, 70, 80-hour work weeks, primarily because of the traditional grading methods that were imposed upon me. That one paradigm of student submits paper and I put oodles and oodles and oodles and gobbles of comments in their margins and these big summative statements at the end, and then I throw a grade on it. So I did my teaching practicums with Theodore Sizer. He was one of my mentor teachers, and he always said that if the onus of learning ever broke from a 50-50 split between teacher and student, that learning would not occur. And unfortunately, in the traditional grading paradigm, I think 99.9% of the onus is on the teacher. We're doing all the work. I mean, think about it. What do students have to do above and beyond read our comments, agree or disagree with our grade? How does that transfer into growth and maturation with regards to their writing abilities? Not very much. So with my alternative grading methods, I like to get that more in kilter of a 50-50 ratio. So I'm going to show you how I incorporate the very hungry caterpillar to alternatively grade these essays, but also use it as a catalyst to construct the essay with my templates. So let's dive right in. So as I already said, we're going to take a look at FRQ2 2022, Linda Hogan's People of the Whale, our octopus friend. So whenever I work with teachers, I preface this, the idea that you have to get comfortable positioning yourself as the expert writer in the classroom. And here's what I mean by this, and I'll give you a brief analogy. So imagine if Bob Ross comes onto the screen and says, "Hello, happy little people. Today we are going to paint a beautiful New England autumnal landscape with beautiful fall foliage. And in the center of our canvas, we're going to include a New England wood-covered bridge." And he were to say, "All right, kids, get your brushes, get your paints, get your easel, get your canvas. On your mark, get set, go. You got 2 class periods to do it. Go!" Right? And then he just milled around the room talking into the ether about the theory and technique of painting. We wouldn't be very good at it. I wouldn't be very good at it. I don't know about you. Some of you are probably innately gifted artists. I would not be very good at that. And the same holds true for our students. When we assign writing versus explicitly teach it, the writing doesn't come out as well as we anticipate, or not anticipate. I know what to anticipate, what we hope for. So explicitly sit down and write exemplars and models with your students, just like I'm going to model for you in a second. Become the Bob Ross of paint of composition, and paint with your kids, and equip them with a template, equip them with a heuristic, just like Bob Ross did. He always used the wet on wet technique. And your students can either declare, invert, and go syllogistic every single time, no matter the FRQ, no matter if it's lit analysis, rhetorical analysis, argument persuasion, synthesis, research. They always can use my templates. So here's the prompt, just to refresh. The following excerpt is from Linda Hogan's novel People of the Whale, published in 2008. In this passage, the narrator describes two events that occur in a community: an infant's birth, shortly followed by an octopus's walking out of the sea. Read the passage carefully, then in a well-written essay, analyze how the author uses literary elements and techniques to develop a complex characterization of the community. So at the time of recording this, scores came out 2 days ago. So I think most people were pleased with this passage and how their students tackled it and got their heads around it. It was a little tricky, and definitely unexpected, and a bit of a curveball, but within the purview of the syllabus for sure. So, all right. So the question is this: how do I write the introductory paragraph? And as always, I tell my students, you can declare or invert. Those are your two options. But here's the kicker, my friends. Here's the kicker. We're going to put this on hyperspeed. For literary analysis, I tell my students to invert. Always, always, always invert unless you have a reason not to. And I'll show you why in just a second. So declare, I use for rhetorical analysis. 50-50 coin flip for argument, persuasion, synthesis. Literary analysis, we always invert. So implicit in that prompt are two questions. What is the authorial intent, and how does the author construct meaning? So I know some of you asked the question about universal truth, and that's what I'm getting at with authorial intent. It's the exact same question. So, what is the universal theme? What is the authorial intent? And then how does the author construct meaning? So quite literally, in terms of the literary terms and devices, what terms and devices construct the overarching meaning of the piece as a whole? If those two questions are answered correctly, so you have to have a correct read of the passage, obviously, but if those two questions are answered and resolved in the introductory paragraph, kids are golden. They're out of the gate with blazing speed. So I'm going to bypass the declarative and get right to the inverted, since that's what we're going to be focusing on. So with my introductions, declare or invert, they're always going to be 4 sentences long. No more, no less. Exactly 4 sentences. And in this case, when you invert, you end with the thesis. With declarative, you begin with the thesis. So the very first 3 sentences, my students are going to provide context and background and answer the first question. What is the authorial intent, or what is the universal truth? So that move takes 3 sentences. The last sentence of the 4 is the answer to the question, how does the author construct meaning? And that is going to be the thesis statement. The construction of meaning. So it's end with the thesis, context, background, resolve those 2 questions, but we want a certain complexity to our writing. So let's talk about vocabulary, voice, rhythm, flow, sentence constructs. I love to see my students be able to wield tier 2 level vocabulary. And what I mean by that is just your average run-of-the-mill SAT level words, so good academic diction. And when they write, I always remind them that, you know, they're 16, 17, 18-year-old kids. Show your personality. So I like to see a tad colloquial vernacular balanced out with that tier 2. And I have a few examples where I can demonstrate that for you. It's a very delicate balance, but I call it the subjective, you know, pizzazz, wow, spunk factor, flair factor, the voice point, right? If they can do that. And then I espouse a theory that Strunk and White espouse, and it's the idea that there's 12 different ways to construct a single sentence. So my students are very well versed, because they've been through my Nuance Academy, on manipulating their syntax to avoid a couple of things that we see in struggling and emerging writers. The over-reliance of the short, simple declarative sentence, short, simple declarative sentence, short, simple declarative sentence. Like sometimes we get a lot of those sentence constructs stacked upon each other. But we get the inverse of that, students who can only, for the most part, wield long, loose sentences. So there's 12 sentence constructs, and each has a purpose, right? And so my students know that stuff fairly well, if they've given me an iota of attention and effort. So we should see all of that come to fruition and see it at play in the samples. And as I said before, it's going to be exactly 4 sentences long. So what we're going to take a look at in terms of Eric Carle is all the food that fat caterpillar eats. And we're going to incorporate it into the writing workshop to make sure that all the elements of the template are at play and present in the student samples. So those graphics, which you'll see in a second, are going to allow us to diagnose in our writing workshop model the good, the bad, the ugly with regards to student writing. So I just print these out on color cardstock, and the kids have these fruits. And what we do is this. So let's say I have a class of 16 students in AP Literature. I'm blessed with like a really good class size. And let's say that I have students submit their papers before class, and I read them over. And typically what I do is on a notepad, I write down the grade I think the student deserves. So let's say I'm reading Jason's and I'm like, it's a solid 4. And I get to Samantha, definitely a 6. And I get to Wyatt's and I'm like, he's struggling, and it's a 2. And I just write down what I think. So I'm not going to traditionally grade them at all. I'm going to run them through this writing workshop. So I anonymously will project on my overhead their introductions. We'll go bit by bit, take a look at intros and then bodies. Students can self-identify if they want. And so let's say that Jason has his introduction up. And as a class, we're going to read it and make sure that he has an inverted thesis, that he's answered the questions: what is the authorial intent? How does the author construct meaning? We're going to see if he has tier 2 level vocabulary, see if he's going for the voice point. We're going to take a look at his sentence constructs, the context, the background, grammar, punctuation, syntax. And again, you can change any of the variables here. So let's say that we're reading Jason's paper, and you know, you have a student by the name of Peter in class, and he says, I want to talk about Jason's tier 2 level vocabulary. And he'll come with his pairs and put the pairs on the tier 2 level words that are present in Jason's paper. Let's say you have a student by the name of Katrina, and she says, I really like Jason's paper quite a bit, but there are 3 comma splices in his introduction alone. So she comes up with her oranges and fixes those commas into semicolons and hyphens, right? So students do the heavy lifting. I, during these writing workshops, kind of sit back and just let the action unfold and steer and guide as needed. So a lot has to happen in the Word Study Academy, the Nuance Academy that I run, in order for these alternative grading methods to work. So and then with the other food groups that our fat caterpillar eats, we talk about anything extraneous, anything extraordinary. Um, let's say, for example, that Jason in his introduction totally regurgitates the prompt. That's extraneous. We don't do that within the space of my templates. So maybe somebody would come up with their pickle and say, like, get the prompt out of your introduction. Or maybe it's 6 sentences long, so they'll come up with their cake and take that out. Or uh, Jason has too many tier 2 level words so that it sounds contrived or pretentious. It's out of his wheelhouse. We'll indicate that. Right? So all those things we'll do. And then all the students have a butterfly. If we see writing that is just extraordinary and transcends the rubric, we're going to give that introduction a butterfly. So here is how the template works. And these exemplars here, these models, are done correctly. So here's the first one. What is the authorial intent? How does the author construct meaning? So you start with the universal truth. It is human tendency for the mind to impose causal order to that which cannot be explained. And that's kind of like, yeah, that's like Hogan's whole point. That's why she wrote this thing. That's the exigence. That's the aha. Given this, as can be seen historically in origin stories, mankind ascribes value and meaning to that which is inexplicable, whether it be explaining the essence of life, the cause of the universe, or even the how and the why of octopus behavior. Man can invent some far-fetched stories. So in the end here, we're going to use our literary terms. What are the most salient literary terms Hogan incorporates to construct meaning? Linda Hogan allegorically comments upon this phenomenon through her representation of the community and its collective interpretation of their cave-dwelling resident. So my students that did well on this, you kind of have to note that it's an allegory. You could sprinkle in other terms and devices, but like the main gist is that it's an allegory. It's a story representing something else. So let's go back to this. So as I said, students have these all printed out. They've cut them out. And let's say that, again, we have that was Jason's, or it's anonymous. And we can say Pamela wants to comment on his piece. And Pamela comes up to the overhead with the apple and says, I'm going to put the apple in the last sentence, which is exactly where it needs to be. Jason did this wonderfully. That's his thesis statement. Linda Hogan allegorically comments upon this phenomena through her representation of the community and its collective interpretation of their cave-dwelling resident. So put the apple there. It's a perfect inverted thesis. It's exactly where it needs to be, and it's wonderful. So let's say we have Lindsay in our class, and she's like, I want to talk about the vocabulary and the voice in this. It's wonderful. I really like it. So I'm going to give a pair to words like impose, human tendency, ascribe, inexplicable, far-fetched, all great words. Really like it. Cave-dwelling resident. Good use of some hipster colloquial vernacular right there. So this has a good teeter-totter balance between the colloquial, the vernacular, and the academic, right? So let's say that we're looking at a different piece, and it's just loaded with big words or misused words, which sometimes our students do. Again, you come up with a pair and say, you use the word cornucopia in your introduction. Good word, like that word, but it doesn't quite work. Maybe we fix that word and substitute it with something, substitute it out for something else. So that's how we proceed through these. So I'll show you another one. I would give number one a butterfly. It was really good. It was very good. So here's another one. It's going to be use the exact same template. What, in terms of what is the authorial intent and how does the author construct meaning. 4 sentences, sentence constructs, tier 2. Ever since the advent of time, man has sought to give voice to the ineffable qualities of nature. And again, that's exactly what Hogan's expressing. Man is a meaning maker, and when meaning cannot be made, he creates stories and ascribes value to things that are actually meaningless and rather innocuous. This is why history is dotted with false gods and false prophets. Last sentence, get into the lit terms and devices. Linda Hogan touches upon this fact through her allegorical rendering of the octopus and her characterization of human reasoning. Very cool. So a little characterization, a little allegory done the exact same way. And again, students would come up with all their food items, have them discuss it. So I'll show you one more here. Life, sadly, is meaningless. Boo, yeah, that's really good. Ever since we pulled ourselves upright and began to do this thing called living, mankind has sought to make sense of his world and its origins. As such, over this great expanse of time, there have been countless gods, deities, and prophets, all of whom are meaningless. I should say Linda Hogan. Linda Hogan gives voice to this through her allegorical depiction of the octopus and through the characterization of the community that interact with it. So, again, let's go back here. We haven't talked about this yet. So, sentence variation. I don't know if these are blueberries or eggplants, but let's say, for example, during our writing workshop, that somebody notices this sentence right here. As such, over this great expanse of time, there have been countless gods, deities, and prophets, all of whom are meaningless. Holy complex. What a great sentence. So put an eggplant on that and have a conversation about it, right? So students can fix each other's grammar, punctuation, syntax. They can celebrate, remarkable syntactical maneuverings. And, if they're working with templates and have a shared common language, you can do this all day long. So here's one thing that I do with my students. Either we're going to take a look at every single student's introduction in the class, or just take a look at, 4 or 5. And I'll do this. I'll say, all right, we looked at 5 introductions. In the comments, in the margins of your paper, write to me what you think is going on with your introduction. Good, bad, ugly. You start the conversation, because in traditional grading practices, I do all the talking. I want you to have a voice in this, because you need to know what you don't know in order to learn. So tell me what you know with regards to your writing, in particular reference to your introduction, and then I can respond to them, or say I agree, I disagree, or in addition to, look at this. So here's one last introduction, again, all done the exact same way. Man's most preeminent fear is that life is for naught. It's beautiful. Like, love the vocab, love the sentence, construct. For centuries, great philosophical minds have wrangled with the big questions as to why we are here and who made us and what does it all add up to. Thousands of years after, we still do not have any definitive answers, yet we persist in trying to make sense of our world. Linda Hogan unpacks this human condition through her allegorical depiction of the octopus and the community's collective rationalizing of its behavior and existence. So each one of these, like, we're crushing the prompt, like we definitely got the thesis point. Thesis comes last, always inverted. Sentence constructs, tier 2, colloquial vernacular. Blend it all together. And out of the gate, you come out with some pretty good blazing speed. So students can take ownership of that grading process and that commentary process if we enable them to be authentic writers in our classroom. And that's something that, I strive really hard for, is to remove myself over time, over the course of the academic year, so that they don't need me. Come time for the exam, I want to be as far removed from the process as possible, because they can't take me to the exam. and they can't take me to college, So it's all about independence, and that's one of the cool things about templates is that they do ultimately lead to autonomy. So the next question is this: how do I write the body paragraphs? And as always, we're going to proceed syllogistically. I'm going to fly through this because I have a lot of videos on the syllogistic method. Probably the one that has the most views, and it's really clever, is Are You My Mother by P.D. Eastman. I use that children's book to explain and teach deductive and inductive reasoning and the basic concept of the syllogistic method. So backtrack through my YouTube channel and scope that out, and it's a good thorough overview of the syllogistic method. In brief, it's rooted in the Aristotelian tradition. So Aristotle ran a school called the Lyceum, and the rich aristocratic boys would go there to learn about polemics, oration, debate, word wrangling, and the maths and the sciences. And you might be familiar with a book like Plato's Republic, where they throw out an essential question: what is justice? And all the philosophical think tankers come to the mic and they drop their definition of what justice is. Each definition is a syllogism, right? So Aristotle was going after what we're going after, a line of reasoning. I call it cogency. So good, clear, lucid logic. And he said, when you argue, it's best to package it mathematically, kind of computatively. Go premise, premise, conclusion, and keep your ducks in a row. And that's what we say to our kids. So if I were to say in a first premise, arsenic is deadly, followed up by the second premise, my dog ate arsenic, and concluded my dog is going to die, we would all say, yeah, Christian, that makes total cogent sense. Like, that's completely rational. Good, solid thinking, right? When our students write, we want them to be that logical. We want them to be that lockstep in their line of reasoning. So for the purposes of doing literary analysis, we like to see that first premise be an argument anchored in literary terms and devices. And I'll model that for you in just a second. Ideally, I like it when my students write first premises that are 3 sentences long. I've taught Lang for 21 years, and I'm used to the direction on FRQ 1. Your argument must be central. And I remind my students in Lang and Lit that all of the FRQs should have that rule. So we're doing literary analysis, which is an expository mode, which is an argument. So they need to be arguing with their literary terms and devices. So I say take 3 sentences, clearly establish your argument so that you don't get into plot summary, right? We're doing literary analysis, not plot analysis. So it's kind of a guardrail or a scaffold or a safety net to ensure that students are staying true to the demands of the assignment and not getting plot heavy if they take 3 sentences to establish that argument. The second premise is textual support. And it's the teeter-totter balance of quoting and paraphrasing. And the conclusion is this. So ultimately, I tell my students, your first premise is a promise. Echo back, link, shake hands, keep the promise. If you're talking about the allegory and the characterization in your first premise, all your quotes and paraphrases need to be germane to the allegory and characterization because it's what you promised. So don't go off talking about, couplets and, tonality shifts or something of that nature. So you're going to break your line of reasoning. So for this, we're still going to do the exact same exercise. We're just going to change the variables. So students often ask me this, we're using templates. We know that your introductory paragraphs are 4 sentences. How many sentences should a syllogistic body paragraph be? And I tell them you're shooting for 10 to 12. I think that's a good substantive, girthy paragraph with lots of support and analysis. 10 to 12 sentences, always, no matter the expository mode. First premise is 3 sentences long. It contains the literary argument, will be the pairs. We're going to take a look at embedded quotes. We're going to continue to have a focus on voice, the tier 2, as well as the colloquial, the vernacular. We could take a look at grammar, punctuation, syntax, but let's go big stuff. Let's go to the good eats. 5-word rule for embedding quotes. So it's a little template that I have, and it works like this. If a student places a minimum of 5 words in front of a quote and keeps the quote relatively small, it should sound conversational. You may need to bracket. And then the big thing is line of reasoning. We got to make sure everything stays intact. We got to be cogent, got to be logical. We need to keep the promise of the first premise, and in the conclusion of the syllogistic body paragraph, we need to make sure we're linking all back. So students have all these graphics. We've cut them out, and they're going to come and tape them onto the overhead projector, right, as we go. So the big thing with my students is this. They ask good questions, and they often say, where do I start my body paragraph? And I say, start where the author starts. Have a chronology, have a sequence, right? Have an order to things. So a lot of my students transition like this, right from the onset. So it cues the reader into knowing that we have a very organized, comprehensive, skillful writer, that they have a chronology, they have a sequence, they have an organizational sequence to their writing. So I like it when my students do that, something like Hogan immediately, so some kind of indication of order. So right from the onset, Hogan creates a causal relationship between the birth of the infant and the inexplicable behavior of the octopus. And again, don't get plot heavy. It has to have a literary focus. In many ways, because of the manner in which the pronouns and conjunctions are manipulated, the passage unfolds like a syllogistic argument progressing from if statements to then claims. The short, simple declarative sentences also highlight this quality. All right, so it's 3 sentences, and it's very well written. So during writing workshops, I ask my students this: put that in a promise. Put those 3 sentences into a promise. So it's basically saying, I promise you, dear reader, that I'm going to have a heavy focus on the syntactical features in the piece, as well as some of the thematic aspects. Like, I don't know, I'm imposing like some language stuff on this. This student is going to get into some logos, even though it's a work of literature, which is totally cool. So 4th sentence, I have my students immediately get into the text and start quoting or paraphrasing. Within the first 2 paragraphs, Hogan references it on several occasions and qualifies the meaning being ascribed to the octopus by the community with as if statements. And again, do you see the quoting here? 5-word rule, right? Don't need to have huge gargantuan quotes. For example, the reader is told that every one of these ocean people stood back, amazed to see it walk, the eye of it looking at them, each one seen as if each one were known in all their past, all their future. All right. The it is the divine significance of the octopus, as well as the human tendency to deify nature when nature's chaos renders things ineffable. So are we keeping our line of reasoning so far? We promised to be talking about conjunctions, pronouns. So far, we're good, right? So all the quotes and paraphrase are germane to the promise. We're keeping our line of reasoning. In this regard, the it is analogous to what humans have done for centuries in terms of divining their known through the likes of gods, prophets, and deities. The fact of the matter is that man does not know his origins, so he indulges in as if thinking because he is afraid of its potent meaning. And I love this. Just throw some quotes in there. Steal from the text. Given that much of life is inexplicable to the human mind, Hogan notes that mankind arbitrarily conflates cause and effect and does things like think it was a holy creature and its presence at the time of his birth granted to Thomas a special life. It's not the best quote transition. I get that. That's one weakness with this student. Further, mankind becomes convinced of these concocted associations. So we got plenty of support and analysis. Let's go back. Is everything germane? Yup. So everything, there's nothing extraneous, no bird walks, no tangential side affairs. We're staying linked to the promise of the first premise. In the conclusion, we got to hammer the prompt and hammer the thesis. As existential as it may sound, the causal relationships in the passage and the syntactical arrangements make one thing clear. Most of the meaning humans ascribe to higher powers is meaningless and arbitrary. As Freud said, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. Sometimes an octopus is just an octopus. So let's go back here. So this is a good example. Have the class do this. Somebody can come up with the eggplants or the blueberries and discuss the embedded quotes. Great voice. That first premise was killer. Crushed it. It was exact. Syllogism, 10 to 12 sentences were good there. The big stuff is the organization. The organizational structure of that syllogism was really nice. The line of reasoning stays intact. The promise of the first premise was kept. And then, the next question is this: what's left to discuss? We got to do more. That's just one paragraph. Go syllogistically again. All right, so you're going to start with an argument anchored in literary terms and devices, and you can switch it. And you still haven't really talked about the allegory, you haven't really talked about the characterization. So go that route. Switch up your quotes, switch up your paraphrases, and follow the exact same template. So that's one really cool thing that we do to kind of teach the template and alternatively grade. So let me tell you this. Since I've read their essays before this exercise, I have them do a couple of steps. So as we're going through all the minutia of the template, all the little, small intricacies of the template down to word level, I want my students to write in the margin and highlight things in their writing and fix things and tell me the good, the bad, the ugly they see in their writing. And ultimately, I have them do this. I say, in 5 sentences, tell me, what you're seeing in your writing, and tell me what grade you deserve and why. And they are wildly accurate about this. So I have very few grade discrepancies with my students, especially AP literature kids tend to be very mature about this. I have to convert everything into a 0 to a 100. So we grade that way. So let's say Jason gives himself an 88 and justifies why it's an 88. And on my notepad, I wrote down 91. If we're within 5 points of each other, I'll give him the higher grade. Anything more than a 5-point differential, I schedule writing conferences to debrief why we're off so much. So students, by looking at writing, can figure out exactly what's going on in their writing. And one big thing with traditional grading methods is the teacher's hogging all the writing. He or she is not sharing the writing with the class. So we hoard it to ourselves. And I really believe that the more writing, even if it's struggling writing, the more students see, the better they're going to become themselves. So, all right, that's that. So at the end here, let me say a couple of things. I have so many irons in the fire, so many exciting things going on. First, a number of people have reached out to me about the exciting news that I'm teaming up with the National Writing Project, and we're going to be running the Teach It Right 5-week mastermind through the National Writing Project, and I'm not going to be doing it independently solo anymore. So for those of you that want or need your professional development stamp, to gather your hours, National Writing Project's a great place to go. It's the National Writing Project has reduced the price because they have more funds than I do and more grants and things of that nature. So it's cheaper to go through the National Writing Project. I'm still the lead teacher for it, but all the perks and benefits and are there. So you get everything that as if I was doing it solo. It's just cheaper. So you can get more information at www.teachinghowtowrite.com about that Teach It Right 5-week mastermind. Over the summer months, I'm also doing my summer short course series. So we have been doing Word Study Academy, Nuance Academy, AP Strategies for Success with Lang and Lit. I'll be doing my 2-hour Alternative Grading Methods Academy, and then last we will be doing the Plato's Plato discussion. So all that information is on my webpage. Feel free to email me with any questions. If you want the templates that or the slides that I used in this presentation, just email me and I will send everything off to you. So be well, happy teaching, happy writing.